Today we're at a really unique park in so many ways. It's one of the only of its kind in the world. Oh my gosh, it also has sonic booms like no other park in the world. Welcome to White Sands, New Mexico. I'm here at White Sands, New Mexico, and the desert here is extremely bright, especially when you're out midday like I am right now. I'm going to come back again at sunset and you'll get to see all the beautiful colors in the evening sky illuminating the sand. Now, one thing about the sand here is this is the only desert that is purely gypsum sand, and gypsum is a calcium sulfate, in contrast to a lot of deserts that are ground down quartz and other minerals. And the interesting thing about this sand is when you walk on it that you feel cool, even midday. It's got the same characteristics as plaster, which is also a gypsum type material. And plaster does not heat up, and so the same thing happens with this sand. You can walk on it in the middle of a day when it's 100 degrees outside, like it is here today. So let's take a look at where White Sands is. This national park lies at the northern part of the Chihuahuan Desert that is actually mostly in north central Mexico, but it does extend into the southwest of the United States. White Sands has an area of roughly 275 square miles and is pretty much surrounded by a missile test site and the Air Force Base just to the north. White Sands National Park also can be divided into roughly 3 areas. We have the dune fields that lie in the eastern portion of the park, and to the west and north lie the alkali flats, which is a large flat area of highly eroded lake bed and full of gypsum and a lot of the source, which we'll talk about. And then to the southwest is Lake Lucero. This is the westernmost part of the park that is still active and subject to a lot of evaporation. Well, now let's take a look at where the park came from originally. And we can go back at least 40 million years ago, where we had a rift zone developing after Pangea started splitting up and things were rearranging in the United States. Tectonically, we started seeing the middle of the continent splitting up, and we call this the Rio Grande Rift. This extensional environment produced some volcanics. It also produced several basins that dropped down, including the Tularosa Basin, where White Sands National Park is found. Now, after this rifting, the extension continued. You had some volcanism, and most of the big extension and basins that we see today developed probably after 15 million years ago until the recent times. So people are going to ask where this gypsum came from, and if you look in the background, there are a bunch of mountains. There's the San Andres Mountains to the west, and a lot of this material came out of the limestone and some of the other layers that were built up in that mountain range. And when they come down with the flash floods and rainfall and even percolating into the groundwater, they fill up this internal basin, which is called Tularosa Basin. And this basin then becomes kind of like a lake, and when it evaporates, you're left with gypsum or selenite crystals. Now, those gypsum crystals that are found on the shore of Lake Lucero undergo big temperature swings from the day that could be 100 degrees to the evening and nighttime, which may be 50 degrees. That 50-degree swing is enough to cause what we call a freeze-thaw condition. In other words, there's a lot of expansion and contraction in those crystals, which enables them to break down. Then when they're fine enough, the wind will pick them up and sweep them out to this area, to where we're standing today. Back at White Sands in the evening, this is right at sunset time. Highly recommend that anyone who comes here definitely check it out in the evening. It's pretty magical. You can see some of the wildlife come out. Not a whole lot, but there are some insects and different organisms that live out here, and at night it's cooler and they can come out and explore and hunt and do whatever they do. We can also appreciate some of the textures in the dunes better because the contrast at this hour is a lot better. You can see ripple marks, you can see layers from old playas, and all kinds of interesting details. Some of the features like the ones we see here include some old shorelines, especially when You get a lot of rainfall and the lake starts to flood into the dune areas. As the water percolates through the sand dunes, it contains gypsum but in solution, and that will act to cement some of the deeper layers and produce a really hard crust. And this could be just under the surface layer, as we see here. It almost has an echo to it. Knock it. And so the surface consists of very fine ripples, wavy like powder, right on the surface of the dunes all the way to the top. Some other features that we can see between the dunes are these compression ridges that happen when the thin layer of crust starts to heat up and expand. And this creates irregular little ridges that work their way kind of like a little spider web through these low-lying areas. One more thing about these dunes is that they're often called Eolian deposits, or Eolian deposits, which means that they're wind-driven. In other words, the wind will scoop up that sand or material from somewhere else, and if it has no exit or place to go down, it'll fall in the middle of a basin. There may be wind coming from other directions every now and then, and eventually you get the dune structures that we see. Now let's address some of the dune types that we find. And the first ones that we really see are the barren or crescent dunes, and these are out at the visitor access areas. And beyond that, we have other varieties. And it's important to talk about these different varieties because it depends a lot on the wind speed and the wind direction. The material also has a lot to do with how much can be transported. So first off, let's see how they evolve from a dome or a pile of sand. So initially we have, like I said, a dome or a pile of sand, and when the wind starts to blow, they start to get stretched out into what we call a barren dune or a crescent dune. And so the long arms tend to flow or point in the direction of the wind, and as the wind speed starts to increase, the whole dune starts to blow out and it starts to get less high and more parabolic in shape, and now the crescent arms will point where the wind is coming from in the opposite direction. We also can see star dunes in some places, and this is where the wind is coming from all directions and piling the dune up higher, and so you get star-shaped crescents at the top of, or when you look from above down. Finally, we also have transverse and safe dunes. The transverse are perpendicular to the direction of the wind, and we see this in the transition zone where the dunes are going from barren to parabolic. We also can see these transverse dunes or shapes or lineaments on the top of the dunes, and these are in the ripple marks. And finally, the safe dunes are where the wind is predominantly parallel with the lineaments or the long portion of the dunes, but it comes from different directions, and so they appear a little bit spiky. And the word saif comes, it's an Arabic word meaning swords, and so they have pointy little bits of the crescent showing. Finally, one of the important finds in White Sands is on the western edge of the park, where a number of fossil tracks have been found going back to the Pleistocene, with mammoth marks, saber-toothed tigers, lions, camels even, and a number of animals. And what we see here is the example of a ground sloth, and standing up, this animal was probably at least 10 feet tall. So we have a lot of interesting prehistory here, and footprints even of early humans that inhabited this area. And it's believed that this is the largest Ice Age collection of fossil tracks in the world. This is truly a remarkable feature that puts White Sands on the world map.
Hold on. All right. 3, 2, 1.